Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here again and on this side of spring, although it feels a little bit more like summer. It's actually a year ago that my message in this period of time was the last virtual message that I gave. So what a year we've had of unbridled freedom. So the reading for me today is one of my favorites, and you will hear probably from this passage quite often as the years unfold. But today I want to look at the deeper understanding that happened along the road to Emmaus. And it comes from Luke 24. On that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and were talking with each other about these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. And then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" I can imagine him copying an attitude with Jesus. He asked him, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and beside all of this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some of the women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself and all the scriptures. As they came near the village to where they were going, he walked ahead as if he was going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened. They recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" Earlier this month, my daughter and her husband finally were able to gather with their friends and families to celebrate their almost solitary marriage that took place 2 years ago as COVID began to shut things down. Just after, it was 2 weeks after we had been through the venue, and then all of a sudden it was shut down. Without the premarital jitters and the typical microscopic attention to details that goes along with a big wedding, the bride and the groom were able to relax and join in the revelries. And for me to say it was a joyous occasion would be an understatement. We had a lot of fun. Well, while I was on the dance floor, yes, I I'm known to dance. I'm known to cut a rug. I was on the dance floor with my 6-year-old granddaughter and other family members. We were kind of dancing in a circle. And one of my family members kind of whispered in my ear because of the music. She said, "Do you think she should be hearing this music, these lyrics? Do you think she even understands?" And I it's like, hey, these lyrics are from the 90s. It's not as bad as what you hear on the radio now. But it got me to thinking. Do you remember the music you listened to as a kid and what you thought were the lyrics? Then one day you just woke up and all of a sudden really heard what the lyrics were saying. And you're like, oh my goodness. When I listened to Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival in 1969, rather than hear Hope You Get Your Things Together, I heard Oakview, Get Your Things Together. And I thought, wow, Oakview, that's my elementary school. I was really impressed that CCR would have us in their song. I really couldn't explain why we needed to prepare to die, which is the next one. But I thought, hey, we got to mention in a top 10 song. Tracy, when she was younger, used to hear Janet Jackson singing Ice-Capades when she was actually singing the title to her song, Escapades. And it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't you hear Ice-Capades if you were a kid? A woman I worked with years ago was embarrassed to admit that instead of hearing Carly Simon sing, "That's the Stuff That Dreams Are Made Of," she heard "Just Stuff That Green Tomato." And the funny thing was that she said I was way older than to know better when I figured out that it was the stuff that dreams are made of. So that's one of the things I connect with this story on the road to Emmaus. It really is. I may have to dig it up for a series because this is such a rich story. But to me, the passage I just read to you is kind of the peak of the whole story, the whole chain of events. It's as a writer would say, it's the denouement. It kind of clarifies what's been going on for the past week. Good old Cleopas and his sad sack companion, they're high-tailing it out of town after Jesus' crucifixion, and maybe was it his resurrection? Was it that somebody stole the body? They don't really know yet. My interpretation is that they're really bummed about the whole situation. I imagine them saying to each other, man, the jig is up, and it's all been a bust because it ended so poorly. The dust from the rough-trod road just kind of swirls around them as if to personify their attempts to settle in their minds and sort out the chaotic and turbulent events of the past week. Have you ever had a time in your life like that? That you had these hopes and dreams and things were going really well, and then all of a sudden they're just dashed against the rocks. Though some of those events come suddenly and it's just out of the blue. I can guarantee you that I did not expect to finish Wake Forest Divinity School with breast cancer and 4 years of New Garden quarterly meetings. 4 years. Losing hope sometimes can feel more like a slow drain, a slow erosion of our dreams, dwindling down to where we feel like we have fewer and fewer options until eventually it feels like they just slip through our fingers. Jesus' message to Cleopas and his traveling companion has been captured in a quote by a prolific Brazilian author and essayist, Fernando Sabino, not John Lennon, who has been credited with it. Sabino wrote, "Everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end." Some of the disciples were ready to write off their experiences with Jesus as lost dreams. But his presence here on the road to Emmaus says otherwise. If you think about it, Jesus is traveling alongside the disciples, and his words of enlightenment are nothing new to Cleopas and his companion. We read in the Gospels many times how Jesus was queried and questioned by the disciples. They wanted to know the meaning of this tradition or an explanation of these scriptures. They asked him to validate truths and to confirm or deny rumors. Sometimes he would answer them really eloquently, and other times he would respond with his own questions. And other times he would just walk away. Somehow they just didn't get every gist of every word that he was saying. They think he meant one thing when he really meant something else. And they just don't seem to have the wisdom or the experience to grasp exactly what Jesus was intending. This time, though, once Jesus sits down at the table with the two weary travelers in our story, they begin to hear his words with a new understanding. To paraphrase theologian and author Marcus Borg, they're hearing Jesus again for the first time. They have a more mature understanding that comes out of their own spiritual development. The end of the story that these disciples had witnessed a week earlier wasn't really the end. Their new understanding might well have come because they'd given up on what they expected to have happen. Or maybe they gave up on what they wanted to have happen. Have you ever been in a meeting where everybody wants what they want to happen? But giving up on that changes the whole outcome. And that makes room for new possibilities and new meanings that these guys weren't even able to imagine when they walked away from that tomb. Everything will be okay in the end. And if it isn't okay, it isn't the end. Now, y'all know me, I think you know me well enough at this point to know that I'm not going to and not willing to wrap this message in a pretty bow and call it a day. I'm still waiting for everything to turn out okay after cancer and quarterly meetings. In fact, Fernando Sabino himself admitted that what he said, everything will be okay in the end, and if it's not the end, that he didn't mean that. He meant it kind of tongue-in-cheek. He was being bitter. And at first, even he didn't believe that everything will be okay. But once he said it, he began to shift. Maybe we can tie together today the fact that with eyes open to seeing new solutions, with hearts open to being changed and softened to new possibilities, and ears open to hearing a truth again for the first time, we can find our way back to hope and back to other options, new dreams, better than we could ever imagine. And so it is. Amen.